My name is Sloan Mercer, and the first time I met Nolan Kessler, he threw my resume in my face. Not figuratively. I mean, the actual pages hit, my skin skimmed my cheek and scattered across the polished floor like fallen dignity. The staple caught just enough to sting, but not nearly as much as his words. He didn't yell. That would have been too human. He looked down from across the conference table with 5 other executives sitting in frozen silence and said, "This is garbage. Try harder next time." His voice was smooth, practiced, dismissive, like a man who had never been told no in his life. I was 28, the same age as him, but I'd worked through night classes while managing my grandmother's bookstore's finances by day. My resume held an economics degree, industry certifications, and 3 years of market predictions that had outperformed traditional models. None of that mattered in that room. Not when your last name isn't on the building. I knelt quietly, gathering the pages as if they were fragile glass, ignoring the burn in my face and the heavier burn in my chest. I wanted to disappear or scream. Instead, I stood, nodded to the room and forced out, "Thank you for your time," though the words tasted like shame. No one made eye contact. The elevator ride down felt longer than my entire education. I pressed the back of my hand against the tiny scratch on my face, still feeling the heat of 10 silent witnesses who chose comfort over decency. I had spent weeks preparing for that interview, not just to impress them, but because I believed my model could change how people think about financial patterns. They didn't even let me finish explaining it. Outside, the city moved around me like nothing had happened. I stood at the corner of 5th and Lexington, papers pressed to my chest like a shield, and made a promise that this wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the start of something bigger. That scratch on my cheek. It became a scar I stopped covering. I went home that night, laid out every line of code in my predictive algorithm, and tore it apart just to rebuild it sharper. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because tears felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Anger would come later. What I felt was something colder, more focused, like standing in a storm with a map in your hand. I didn't know the destination, but I knew I wasn't turning back. That day, Nolan thought he'd ended my ambition. What he didn't realize was he'd just given it purpose. I walked into our office the next morning like nothing had happened, but Clara Hartwell saw through me immediately. She leaned against the side of my cubicle, arms crossed her sharp eyes, studying my posture like she was scanning market data. I tried to keep my tone even as I told her what Nolan had done, how he called my work garbage and tossed it like trash in front of a boardroom full of silent men. When I finished, she didn't say she was sorry. Clara never wasted words on sympathy. She pulled over a chair, sat down like we had all the time in the world, and said, "So show me what they missed." Her voice was steady, not soft, not angry either, just curious, like she already knew the outcome and was waiting for me to catch up. I pulled up my data model, walking her through the threads I had stitched together from political appointments, trend forecasting, and psychological shifts in consumer behavior. Clara didn't blink. She didn't interrupt. She asked 2 questions, both so precise they made me rethink entire sections of my logic. When I was done, she sat back and said, "You're not just onto something, you're ahead of it." Then she pushed her laptop toward me. "I want you to formalize this, build it out. Get me a team proposal and a roadmap. You're not chasing their approval anymore. You're building what they'll wish they hadn't ignored." She didn't have to say more. Clara had built Hartwell Analytics from nothing in an era when no one took female founders seriously. She knew exactly what rejection looked like and how to turn it into strategy. In her eyes, I didn't see pity. I saw fire. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and mapped out everything algorithms team needs, potential market gaps. Clara had given me something Nolan never could, not just validation, but a platform. She didn't hand me power. She handed me tools and trusted I knew how to use them. That was the day the humiliation stopped being a wound. It became fuel. And Clara, without ever raising her voice, lit the match. The first thing I did was rebuild the model from the ground up. I stripped out every assumption I had taken for granted, every shortcut I'd made to impress interview panels. Clara gave me access to more data than I'd ever had before, and I devoured it like someone starving not for food, but for clarity. I worked in silence most days, headphones in background noise, low hands moving through code and market charts like I was composing something private. I didn't talk much in meetings. I didn't need to. The numbers started doing the speaking for me. Trends I flagged became real shifts. Warnings I sent out months in advance turned into firm-wide strategy adjustments. Clients noticed, even if they didn't know who was behind the curtain. Clara gave me 2 junior analysts by the end of the 3rd month. I trained them quietly, not just on how the system worked, but on why. I taught them to see markets not as numbers, but as behavior humans, reacting to stress-fear politics, patterns they didn't know they were repeating. They picked it up fast. One of them, a former psychology major, helped me fine-tune our social trend indicators. We started catching disruptions before they broke headlines. By month 8, we'd saved 3 major clients from exposure to a tech collapse everyone else had walked into blindly. No fanfare, no press releases. Just a quiet memo from Clara that said, "Keep going. We're on to something." That was all I needed. I didn't want the credit. I wanted the results. People inside the firm started to ask who was behind the predictions. Clara never said. I didn't offer. It wasn't about mystique. It was about momentum. Let the myth build itself. If they saw a pattern and respected it, that was enough. I turned down 2 interview requests from industry publications. I declined a podcast invitation. Clara asked once if I was sure. I said I was. Not yet. I wanted the work to build its own weight before I stepped into the light. She nodded, like she understood. Of course she did. We didn't just avoid disaster, we started attracting clients from other firms. One VP at a multinational said she'd heard about our shadow analyst, who always seemed to be 3 steps ahead. I said nothing. Clara smiled behind her coffee cup. The team grew slowly, each hire deliberate. I made sure none of them came from referrals or family ties. I didn't care about who they knew, I cared about how they thought. That became a quiet rule merit first always. At night, I still worked alone sometimes, refining code, rechecking models. The more I saw behind the curtain of the financial industry, the clearer it became that traditional firms were operating on habit and arrogance. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. They had left a door open and I had walked through it without a sound. 18 months after Nolan Kessler called my work garbage, our firm was not just surviving a volatile market. We were growing. The clients we protected spread the word. Industry insiders talked about a new standard for risk analysis. No one said my name. That was how I wanted it. Until the storm came to their door and forced them to find me. The call came on a Tuesday morning just after 9. Clara had stepped out for a meeting, and I was reviewing currency movements when her assistant knocked once and handed me her phone. He said it was urgent. I took it expecting a client issue, maybe a regulator inquiry. Instead, I heard a voice I'd never met but knew instantly. "Sloan Mercer, this is Preston Kessler." My pulse didn't change. I didn't need to ask how he got the number. People like Preston always find what they need when they're desperate. He got straight to it. Our firm just lost nearly $40 million during the collapse. We were blindsided. Everyone's saying you saw it coming. They say you're the only one who did. There was a pause, like he expected me to say something. I didn't. He kept going. "We need your insight. We need to know what we missed and how to stop the bleeding." Still calm, I replied, "I'll need full access to your internal data. All of it." "Of course," he said quickly. "Anything. Can you come to our offices this afternoon?" That was the moment I let him hear the edge in my voice. "I'll come at 3. But there's a condition." I heard the hesitation before he spoke. "Name it." "I want to present my analysis directly to your board, and Nolan will be there. He won't speak. He won't interrupt. He'll listen to every word like he should have 18 months ago." The silence on the other end held its breath. Then he said, "I understand. We'll be ready." I handed the phone back to Clara's assistant and closed my laptop with deliberate care. I sat for a moment, letting the irony settle like dust in sunlight. They hadn't changed. Not yet. They were still calling from the top of the tower, looking down, reaching out only because their world was tilting. But this time, I wasn't coming as a hopeful applicant. I was coming as the expert they couldn't afford to ignore. Clara returned just before lunch. I told her about the call. She studied me quietly. "Are you going to help them?" I nodded. "I'm going to help them understand exactly what they missed." She smiled, slow and knowing. "Then do it on your terms." And I would. I wasn't going back to beg. I was going back to teach. And Nolan Kessler was going to sit through every second of the lesson. The receptionist didn't recognize me. She offered the same clipped smile she probably gave to dozens of consultants a week, then led me to the main boardroom. The same one, same high-gloss table, same leather chairs, same skyline view trying to distract from what happened inside. Clara walked beside me in silence. Her presence wasn't just backup, it was a signal. We weren't here to ask for anything. We were here because they had no choice. Inside the room was full. Preston stood when we entered. Several board members glanced up, confused and then cautious. I could see it, the flicker of recognition from two of them who had been there the last time. They didn't speak. I didn't smile. Preston gestured to a seat. Clara stayed standing. So did I. I connected my laptop to the screen and brought up the first slide. No introduction, just data. This is your performance over the last 5 years. These red lines mark major decisions made under Nolan Kessler's leadership. As you can see, 84% underperformed the market. A quarter resulted in direct losses. Someone shifted in their seat. I continued. These trends were predictable. My model flagged the vulnerabilities 3 months before the collapse. Your losses could have been prevented, but that's not your biggest problem. Based on current exposure, you stand to lose an additional $90 million if you continue relying on outdated models. Preston's voice broke the silence. How certain are you? 97%. I said it without blinking. One of the analysts leaned forward, eyes narrowed in disbelief. I moved to the next slide. This isn't guesswork. These are behavioral shifts, geopolitical triggers, and trade patterns. Your current system doesn't account for any of them, and your solution. Another board member asked. I advanced to the final slide. Structural reform. Executive restructuring based on merit, not lineage. A risk protocol that integrates human behavior into financial forecasting, and a governance framework that prevents unilateral decision-making by underqualified leadership. Preston looked pale. And if we decline, I turned toward him, calm as still water. Then your shareholders will initiate a vote of no confidence. I paused, including your 3 largest institutional investors. The room froze. I didn't need to name them, they already knew which ones. The boardroom felt smaller than it had 18 months ago. Back then, I stood at the far end, dismissed before I could even begin. Now I stood at the head of the table, holding not revenge, but results. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't been insulted. I brought proof. That's what my resume always was. Not a document. A demonstration. A pattern you refused to see. I disconnected the laptop and stepped back. You know how to reach me. If you want to stop the bleeding, we will start immediately. As I turned to leave, I glanced once toward Nolan. He sat in the same chair where he'd tossed my resume. His hands were still. His eyes were wide. I held his gaze for one breath, then walked out, leaving only the truth behind. The offer came the next day. Preston's voice was tighter than before, but his words were deliberate. The board had approved every part of my proposal, and they wanted me to lead the new department as head of risk strategy. I listened without reacting. Then I told him I'd consider it on 3 conditions. First, I would bring 2 analysts from my current team. No negotiations, no delays. These were people I trusted, who understood the framework, and who'd helped build it from day one. Second, I would have full autonomy over the methodology. No filters, no approvals. If I were going to be responsible for future predictions, I needed the freedom to act on them. He agreed quickly, eager to secure my involvement. Then I gave him the third condition. Nolan worked under me for the first 6 months. Direct report, no special privileges. He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. That may be difficult, he said. I kept my tone flat. It's non-negotiable. If he's staying in this company, he needs to understand what saved it, and who better to teach him than me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. If the system was going to change, it had to start with accountability at the top. Nolan had been handed power without understanding how to wield it. Now he'd learn, or he'd fall behind. Either way, the process would expose the truth. 2 hours later, Preston called again. The board had agreed to all 3 terms. I accepted. Not with celebration, not with satisfaction, just certainty. This wasn't a victory lap. It was foundation work. Systems don't collapse all at once. They rot slowly from within. I wasn't there to burn anything down. I was there to rebuild it brick by brick from the inside. Starting with the part that had failed me first. Nolan showed up 15 minutes late on his first day. He didn't apologize. Just walked in with coffee in hand, sat down across from my desk, and waited for instructions with that same bored expression he'd worn the day he dismissed me. I handed him a file. It was a full analysis request using traditional market models, something I knew he'd find tedious. He barely glanced at it before saying this was beneath him. No, I told him. Until now, you've been beneath it. He looked at me irritated but confused. He wasn't used to someone challenging him without fear. That became our rhythm. He'd arrive late. He'd drag his feet. He'd question every assignment like he was trying to catch me in a trap I'd already outgrown. I didn't argue. I just tracked every excuse, every missed deadline, every time he cut corners. He was predictable. But then a small shift. One afternoon, I found his notes from an assignment I hadn't asked for, his handwriting messy but present. He'd run his own comparisons between our method and the outdated models. He didn't tell me he did it. He just left them where they could be found. A week later, he started showing up on time. Still cold, still quiet. But on time. He didn't talk much, but he listened more. When I explained correlations between social sentiment trends and capital movement, he nodded instead of dismissing it. Then he asked a question, a real one, the kind that told me he'd actually been paying attention. 2 months in, I walked through the bullpen late at night and found him still at his desk. The office was empty except for him. His jacket thrown over the back of his chair sleeves rolled a dozen printouts spread across his desk. He looked up when he saw me. I raised an eyebrow. Trying to understand this pattern, he said. It doesn't track with anything I've seen. I looked at his work. He was right. It didn't fit the old logic because it wasn't old logic. I showed him how 3 indicators lined up in our system. He listened without interruption. Why are you helping me? He asked. I considered the question. Because potential without discipline is worthless. You've got the former. I'm forcing you to develop the latter. He didn't say anything, just nodded slowly. That was the first time I saw him working, not pretending. And for the first time since we met, I thought maybe, just maybe, he might be worth the effort. The report landed on my desk before I knew to expect it. No one had assigned it. No one even mentioned the region it covered. But there it was, 30 pages of clean, detailed analysis on emerging risks in a South Asian market we'd flagged only in passing. I flipped through it, slowly scanning his notes, his projections, the way he identified a pattern in trade volume that mirrored one of our flagged collapse scenarios. It wasn't perfect, but it was competent, thoughtful, thorough. His name was on the cover. I sent him a message, see me. He arrived within minutes, posture straight, eyes steady. I held up the report. Did you do this on your own? Yes. Every part of it. I asked why. He hesitated, then said, because I saw something and thought it needed to be documented before it spread. That was the right answer. Not because it flattered me, but because it meant he had stopped performing and started thinking. "You're presenting this to the board," I told him. He froze. "What? No. I'm not ready." "You are, if you did the work," I said. "It's time they saw it for themselves." He showed up to the meeting in a gray suit, one he hadn't worn since I stripped him of his corner office. He looked nervous but focused. When I introduced him, the surprise in the room was visible. Nolan Kessler had not been a name they associated with insight. He walked them through the data clearly, without flair. He didn't try to sound smart, he explained, and he did it well. When one board member asked how confident he was in his projection, he glanced at me, then back at them. "Based on the methodology we use, I'm about 89% confident. The patterns are consistent with early-stage instability in similar economies." Another board member asked for his recommendation. He delivered it straight. Reallocate investments, reduce exposure, move fast. The room was quiet for a moment. Then came a nod, then another. The vote to follow his recommendation was unanimous. Afterward, I stood at the back of the room watching as his father pulled him aside. I couldn't hear what they said, but I didn't need to. His expression had shifted, less guarded, more real. I didn't congratulate him. Not yet. Respect in my world isn't gifted. It's earned, but I made a note. Not of the man he was, of the one he might still become. It was exactly 6 months to the day when Nolan knocked on my office door. He wasn't scheduled. No email, no pretext. He just stepped in holding a folder like it weighed more than paper ever could. I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. He placed the folder on my desk and said, "I'm not here to resign. I'm applying. Junior analyst. No special title, no shortcut. Just the job if I've earned it." I opened the folder. The resume inside was simple, honest. No embellishments. No legacy roles or inflated titles. Just work he'd actually done. There was a note on top in his handwriting. Not garbage anymore. Still needs work. I looked up at him, and for the first time I didn't see the boy from that boardroom. I saw a man who had walked through fire and come back carrying the lesson, not the burns. "Application accepted," I said. "You start on Monday. New desk, new responsibilities." He nodded, not with relief but with quiet understanding. "Thank you. I won't disappoint you." "This isn't about me," I replied. "It's about the standard. Meet it. That's how you stay." He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "When you get to your desk, you'll see something waiting." His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't ask. He just left. I watched from my window as he entered the analyst bullpen. On his new desk, there was a frame. Inside it, the resume he once threw in my face. Same fold marks, same staple, the one that left a scratch. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "Where we begin is not where we end." He stood there for a long time reading it, not touching it, just letting the weight settle. That document had once been dismissed without a second glance. Now it stood as a quiet monument to everything we'd both become. Because the most powerful revenge isn't crushing your enemy. It's building a world where merit has the final say, where resumes are read, not judged, and where the system that once broke you now answers to the strength you built from its failure.